I held a death sentence in my hands at 9:15 that morning, and I had no idea that in just 72 hours, everything I believed about medicine, about science, about the very limits of what's humanly possible, would be completely shattered. My name is Dr. Michael Harrison. I've been a pathologist here in Orlando for 23 years. 23 years of looking through microscopes, analyzing tissue samples, and delivering diagnoses that either give families hope or destroy their world in a single sentence. I work at Orlando Regional Medical Center, and let me tell you something. When you've seen what I've seen, when you've had to look into the eyes of desperate families and tell them their loved one has stage 4 cancer, you develop what we call professional detachment. You have to. Otherwise, the weight of all that pain would crush you. But this case changed everything. It was a Tuesday morning in October, and I remember the exact moment because I was drinking my 3rd cup of coffee, a habit I developed over the years to stay sharp during those long hours examining slides. The Florida sun was already beating down hard outside our lab windows, and the air conditioning was struggling to keep up. Just another ordinary day in what I thought was an ordinary career. Then my assistant, Sarah, knocked on my door with that particular look on her face. You know the one. The look that says whatever's coming next is going to be complicated. "Dr. Harrison," she said, her voice unusually quiet. "We just received a priority case from the ER. The patient is still upstairs, and her family, well, they're demanding we expedite everything." I looked up from the slide I was examining. A routine biopsy that would probably come back benign. "What's the case?" Sarah handed me the file, and I could see her hands were slightly trembling. In 23 years, I'd never seen Sarah's hands shake. 32-year-old female, Isabella Martinez, 2 young children, ages 4 and 7. She came in yesterday with severe abdominal pain, and the initial scans show. She paused, and I knew immediately this wasn't going to be good news. "Show what, Sarah?" "Multiple masses throughout her abdomen and pelvis. The radiologist's preliminary report suggests advanced malignancy. Dr. Chen from oncology wants a definitive diagnosis as soon as possible." I took the file and opened it, scanning the basic information. Isabella Martinez, born and raised here in Orlando, worked as an elementary school teacher at Lake Eola Elementary. Married to Carlos Martinez, a construction worker. No significant medical history. No family history of cancer. Just a regular Tuesday morning that was about to become the worst day of this family's life. "Where's the family now?" I asked, already knowing I'd probably have to face them later with devastating news. "They're in the family consultation room on the 4th floor. The husband, Carlos, hasn't left the hospital since yesterday. Her mother flew in from Puerto Rico this morning." "Dr. Harrison, I've seen a lot of families over the years, but these people, they're barely holding it together." I nodded and reached for my lab coat. "Get the tissue samples prepared immediately. I want to start the analysis within the hour." But as Sarah turned to leave, she stopped at the door and looked back at me with an expression I'll never forget. "Dr. Harrison, there's something else. The patient, Isabella. She kept asking the nurses if she was going to see her children grow up. They didn't know what to tell her." Those words hit me harder than they should have. After 23 years, I thought I was immune to the emotional weight of these cases. I thought I could maintain that professional distance that kept me sane and functional. But something about a 32-year-old elementary school teacher asking if she'd see her children grow up, it broke through every wall I'd built around my heart. I walked down to the pathology lab, my footsteps echoing in the sterile hallway. The samples were already waiting for me, labeled with Isabella's information. As I prepared the first slide, I couldn't shake the image of those 2 children, 4 and 7 years old. Probably at home with a babysitter, completely unaware that their mother's life was hanging in the balance just a few miles away. The first thing I noticed when I looked through the microscope was the aggressive nature of the cellular structure. The tissue was riddled with abnormal cells, and they were multiplying at a rate that made my stomach drop. In layman's terms, what I was seeing was a cancer so advanced, so widespread, that it had likely been growing undetected for months. I spent the next 4 hours examining slide after slide, hoping against hope that I might find some sign, some small indication that this wasn't as bad as it appeared. But every sample told the same devastating story. This wasn't just cancer. This was cancer in its most ruthless, unforgiving form. At 2:15 in the afternoon, I finally pushed back from the microscope and rubbed my tired eyes. I had examined every sample twice, run every test protocol we had available, and consulted with 2 of my colleagues. The diagnosis was clear, and it was exactly what no family should ever have to hear. I picked up the phone to call Dr. Chen in oncology, but before I could dial, Sarah appeared at my door again. "Dr. Harrison, the family is asking if they can speak with you directly. The husband, Carlos, he's been pacing the halls for hours. He wants to know what you found." This was the part of my job I hated most. The part where I had to look into the eyes of people who were clinging to hope and systematically destroy that hope with medical facts and statistical probabilities. But it was also the part that made me realize why I became a doctor in the first place. To help people understand what they were facing, even when what they were facing was the worst possible news. "Tell them I'll be up in 15 minutes, I said. "And Sarah, ask Dr. Chen to meet us there. They're going to need to understand all their options." As I walked toward the elevator, I rehearsed the words I would use. How do you tell a husband that his wife, the mother of his children, has maybe weeks to live? How do you explain to a grandmother who just flew in from Puerto Rico that her daughter's future has been reduced to a series of aggressive treatments that might buy time but probably won't save her life? The elevator doors opened on the 4th floor, and I could immediately hear the sound of quiet crying coming from the family consultation room. I paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and realized that in just a few minutes, I would be delivering the kind of news that changes everything forever. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly have known as I walked down that hallway with Isabella Martinez's death sentence in my hands, was that this case wouldn't end the way cases like this always end. What I didn't know was that in exactly 72 hours, I would be staring at the same tissue samples with my mouth hanging open, calling colleagues across the country, and questioning everything I thought I knew about the boundaries between science and something far more powerful. What I didn't know was that Isabella Martinez was about to become the case that would change not just her life, but mine forever. I knocked softly on the door of the family consultation room and heard a muffled, "Come in," from inside. When I opened the door, the scene that greeted me was one I'd witnessed hundreds of times before, but somehow, this time felt different. This time, the weight of what I was about to say seemed heavier than it had ever felt in 23 years of practice. Carlos Martinez was sitting in the corner chair, his work boots still covered in concrete dust from the construction site he'd obviously rushed from the day before. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were bloodshot from a sleepless night. But what struck me most was the way he kept checking his phone, probably looking at pictures of his children, or checking for updates from whoever was watching them. Next to him sat an older woman, who had to be Isabella's mother. She had flown in from Puerto Rico that morning, and you could tell she was still in shock. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, and she was whispering what sounded like prayers in Spanish under her breath. Every few seconds, she would look toward the door with desperate hope, as if the next person to walk in might be bringing good news. "Mr. Martinez, Mrs. Gonzalez," I said, introducing myself. "I'm Dr. Harrison, the pathologist who's been examining your daughter's tissue samples." Carlos immediately stood up, his eyes searching my face for any hint of what I was about to tell them. "Doctor, please just tell us straight. Is it what we think it is?" I sat down across from them, and Dr. Chen from oncology quietly entered the room behind me. This was the moment I always dreaded, the moment when a family's worst fears become their new reality. "I've completed a thorough analysis of all the tissue samples we collected," I began, choosing my words carefully. "The results confirm that Isabella has what we call adenocarcinoma, a form of cancer that has unfortunately spread to multiple areas of her abdomen." The silence that followed was deafening. Carlos's face went completely white, and he slowly sank back into his chair. Isabella's mother let out a sound that wasn't quite a gasp and wasn't quite a cry. It was the sound of a heart breaking in real time. How bad is it?" Carlos finally managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Chen leaned forward and spoke gently. "Carlos, I won't lie to you. The cancer is quite advanced. Based on what we're seeing, we're looking at a stage 4 diagnosis. The tumors have spread throughout her pelvic region and into her lymph nodes. What does that mean for Isabella? Mrs. Gonzalez asked in heavily accented English, her voice shaking. What does that mean for my daughter? This was always the hardest part. Translating medical reality into words that families could understand, while still maintaining some thread of hope. It means we're dealing with an aggressive cancer that will require immediate and intensive treatment. We're talking about chemotherapy, possibly surgery, and we'll need to move quickly. Carlos looked up at me with eyes full of desperation. Doctor, I need you to tell me the truth. My children are 4 and 7 years old. Are they going to lose their mother? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. In my 23 years as a pathologist, I'd learned to speak in terms of statistics, treatment options, and medical possibilities. But when a father asks you directly if his children are going to become motherless, all the medical training in the world doesn't prepare you for that moment. Carlos, I said carefully, I've seen this type of cancer before. Without treatment, we would typically be looking at a timeline of weeks to a few months. With aggressive treatment, we might extend that significantly, possibly years. But I have to be honest with you. Stage 4 adenocarcinoma with this level of spread. It's one of the most challenging diagnoses we face. Mrs. Gonzalez suddenly stood up, her face flushed with emotion. No, she said firmly, switching between English and Spanish. No, doctor. You don't understand. Isabella is strong. She's a fighter. God has plans for her. He wouldn't take her from her babies. He wouldn't do that. I'd heard similar words from countless families over the years. Faith, hope, denial. They all blended together in those consultation rooms. But there was something different about the way Isabella's mother spoke. Something in her voice that was less desperation and more certainty. Mrs. Gonzalez, I said gently, I understand this is devastating news. And you're right. Isabella is young and strong, which gives her the best possible chance to respond to treatment. Dr. Chen and his team are going to develop an aggressive treatment plan starting immediately. When can I see her? Carlos asked. I haven't been able to really talk to her since yesterday. The nurses said she was resting, but I know she's awake. I know she's waiting to hear what you found. Dr. Chen nodded. She's actually asking for both of you. We've told her we need to discuss the results with the family first, but she knows something serious is happening. Carlos, I think it's important that you understand what we're dealing with before you go up to see her. Tell me everything, Carlos said, his voice becoming stronger. I need to know exactly what my wife is facing. I opened Isabella's file and began explaining the technical details in terms they could understand. The primary tumor is located in her ovaries, but it's metastasized. Spread to her fallopian tubes, her peritoneum, which is the lining of her abdomen, and several lymph nodes. The cellular structure shows rapid division, which means the cancer is growing quickly. How quickly? Mrs. Gonzalez asked, though I could tell she didn't really want to know the answer. Based on the size and spread of the tumors, this has likely been developing for 6 to 8 months, possibly longer. The fact that Isabella only started experiencing symptoms recently suggests the cancer was growing silently for quite some time. Carlos put his head in his hands. She's been tired lately. More tired than usual. And she mentioned some stomach pain, but we thought it was stress from work. The kids have been demanding this school year, and she's been staying late to help students who are struggling. We never thought… Carlos, I interrupted gently. There's no way you could have known. This type of cancer is often called a silent killer because the early symptoms are so subtle and easily mistaken for other things. You couldn't have prevented this. But Mrs. Gonzalez wasn't listening to our conversation about symptoms and timelines. She had moved to the window and was staring out at the Orlando skyline, her lips moving in what was clearly intense prayer. After a few moments, she turned back to us with an expression I'd never seen before in a family consultation room. Dr. Harrison, she said, her voice steady and clear, I know you're a man of science. I know you deal with facts and statistics and medical evidence. But I need you to understand something about my daughter, about our family. I nodded, unsure where she was going with this. Isabella has been praying for other people her entire life. When she was 7 years old, she prayed for our neighbor's sick baby, And that baby recovered from a heart condition the doctor said was incurable. When she was in college, she organized prayer groups for students who were struggling. And I saw miracles happen. Students who were failing suddenly excelling. Students who were depressed finding hope. Carlos looked up at his mother-in-law with a mixture of love and concern. Mama Elena, I know Isabella is special. I know she has a gift for helping people. But this is different. This is cancer. This is exactly when her gift matters most, Mrs. Gonzalez. Elena replied firmly. Doctor, I'm not asking you to believe what I believe. I'm just asking you not to give up on my daughter before you've tried everything. Everything. Dr. Chen leaned forward. Mrs. Gonzalez, I want you to know that we are absolutely going to try everything. We have chemotherapy protocols that have shown promise with this type of cancer. We have surgical options. We're going to fight this with every tool modern medicine has available. And I'm going to fight it with prayer, Elena said simply. And I'm going to ask you, Dr. Harrison, to consider something. You've been studying disease for 23 years. You've seen things that medical textbooks can't explain. Haven't you? She was right, of course. Every pathologist has cases that don't fit neatly into diagnostic categories. We have unexplained recoveries, sudden improvements that make no medical sense, cases where patients recover against all statistical probability. We usually chalk them up to misdiagnosis, delayed treatment effects, or statistical anomalies. But Elena was asking me to consider another possibility. Mrs. Gonzalez, I've seen some cases that were surprising. Then, will you promise me something? She asked, her eyes intense with purpose. Will you promise me that when the medical options are exhausted, when the statistics say there's nothing more to be done, will you try one more test? Will you look one more time? Before I could respond, there was a soft knock on the door. A nurse peered in apologetically. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Isabella is asking for her family. She says she can't wait any longer to know what's happening. Carlos stood up immediately. We need to go to her now. She needs to know we're going to fight this together. But as we prepared to leave the consultation room, Elena grabbed my arm gently. Dr. Harrison, she whispered, I know this sounds impossible, but I believe God has a plan for my daughter that's bigger than any diagnosis, and I believe He's going to use you to help make that plan happen. As we walked toward the elevator that would take us to Isabella's room, I couldn't shake Elena's words. In 23 years of medicine, I'd learned to trust science, to rely on evidence, to base my conclusions on measurable, repeatable results. But something about Elena's absolute certainty, something about the way she spoke about her daughter, made me wonder if I was about to witness something that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the limits of healing. What I couldn't possibly have imagined was that in less than 72 hours, Elena's words about trying one more test would echo in my mind as I stared at results that defied every law of medicine I'd ever learned. The elevator ride to Isabella's room felt like it took forever, even though it was only 3 floors up. Carlos stood with his back against the wall, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to compose himself for what would be the hardest conversation of his life. Elena stood beside him, and I noticed something remarkable. While Carlos was falling apart, Elena seemed to be growing stronger with each passing moment, as if she was drawing strength from some invisible source. Dr. Harrison, Carlos said quietly as we reached the 7th floor. How do I tell my wife that she might not see our children graduate from high school? How do I tell a woman who spends every day teaching other people's children that she might not be here to teach her own children how to drive, or help them with college applications, or walk her daughter down the aisle someday? Before I could answer, Elena placed her hand on her son-in-law's shoulder. Carlos, you don't tell her she's going to die. You tell her she's going to fight, and you tell her she's not fighting alone. We stopped outside room 712, and I could see through the small window that Isabella was awake, staring at the ceiling. She looked so young lying there in that hospital bed, connected to monitors and IV lines. It's one thing to examine tissue samples in a laboratory. It's something completely different to see the human being those samples came from, to see the person whose life hangs in the balance of your diagnosis. Carlos knocked softly and pushed the door open. Isabella? We're here, mi amor. Isabella turned her head toward us and I was struck by her eyes. They were tired, yes, and filled with worry. But there was also something else there. a strength that reminded me immediately of her mother. "Carlos," she said, her voice weak but clear, "please tell me what the doctor found." Carlos moved to her bedside and took her hand. I watched as this construction worker, this man whose hands were calloused from years of hard labor, gently stroked his wife's hair with the tenderness of someone handling the most precious thing in his world. "Baby," he began, his voice breaking slightly. It's what we were afraid it might be." Isabella closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and then looked directly at me. "Dr. Harrison, I need you to tell me exactly what you found. I'm a teacher. I deal with difficult truths every day. I can handle whatever this is." I pulled up a chair next to her bed. "Isabella, the tissue samples show that you have adenocarcinoma, a type of cancer that has spread to several areas in your abdomen. It's what we classify as stage 4, which means it's advanced." She was quiet for a long moment, processing the information. Then she asked the question that every patient asks, the question that reveals everything about who they are as a person. "How long do I have?" "With aggressive treatment," Dr. Chen interjected gently, "we're looking at extending your life significantly. We have chemotherapy protocols, surgical options, clinical trials. We're going to throw everything we have at this." But Isabella wasn't satisfied with medical optimism. She looked directly at me with those clear, intelligent eyes. "Dr. Harrison, you've been doing this for 23 years, based on what you've seen, based on your experience, not hope, not possibility, but experience. How long do I have?" This was the moment I'd been dreading, the moment when medical honesty collides with human hope. "Isabella, without treatment, we would typically see a progression over weeks to a few months. With treatment, we might extend that to years. But this type of cancer, with this level of spread—" "Just say it," she said firmly. "Please. The 5-year survival rate for stage 4 adenocarcinoma with this extent of metastasis is approximately 8%. The silence that followed was devastating. Carlos let out a sound that was part sob, part gasp. Elena moved to the other side of Isabella's bed and took her daughter's other hand. "But Isabella—" Isabella just nodded, as if she was filing away information she needed to know. 8%, she repeated quietly. "So there is a chance." "Isabella," I said carefully, "I want you to understand that 8% represents patients who respond exceptionally well to treatment, who catch the cancer at a slightly earlier stage, who have factors working in their favor that we can't always predict." "But it's not 0%, she said, looking at her mother. "Mama, you always told me that as long as there's any chance at all, God can work." Elena squeezed her daughter's hand. "Mija, I've been praying since the moment you called me yesterday, and I feel something in my heart. This is not how your story ends." Dr. Chen cleared his throat. "Isabella, we need to start treatment immediately. I want to begin chemotherapy within the next 48 hours. The sooner we start fighting this, the better chance we have of slowing its progression." "What about my children?" Isabella asked, and I could see the tears she'd been holding back finally beginning to fall. "What about Emma and Diego? How do I tell a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old that mommy is sick? How do I explain this to them?" Carlos leaned down and kissed her forehead. "We tell them that mommy is going to fight, and that we're all going to fight together. And we tell them that no matter what happens, they are loved more than they could ever possibly understand." Isabella looked around the room at all of us, her husband, her mother, the doctors who were trying to save her life. "I want to fight," she said with sudden determination. "I want to try everything, every treatment, every option, every possibility. But I need you all to promise me something." "Anything," Carlos said immediately. "If the treatments stop working, if the cancer keeps spreading despite everything we try, I don't want to spend my remaining time in a hospital room. I want to spend it at home with Emma and Diego. I want to make sure they have as many good memories with their mother as possible." Dr. Chen nodded. "Isabella, that's absolutely something we can arrange when the time comes. But right now, I want to focus on fighting this disease with everything we have." "Dr. Harrison," Elena said, turning to me with that same intense look she'd had downstairs, "I know you've completed your analysis. I know you've given us the diagnosis. But I want to ask you something that might sound strange. I nodded, though I had no idea where she was going with this. In your 23 years as a pathologist, have you ever had a case where the initial diagnosis was wrong? Where you looked at tissue samples again after treatment and found something different than what you originally saw? It was an unusual question, but not an unreasonable one. Yes, I admitted. It's rare, but it happens. Sometimes treatment can cause changes in cellular structure that make follow-up biopsies look different. Sometimes we discover that what appeared to be malignant was actually a very unusual benign growth. Why do you ask? Elena looked at her daughter, then back at me. Because I believe in miracles, Dr. Harrison. Not the kind of miracles that ignore medicine or replace proper treatment, but the kind that work alongside medicine, the kind that help treatment succeed when they shouldn't, the kind that make 8% survival rates become 100% recoveries. Isabella squeezed her mother's hand. Mama, I love your faith, but I need to be realistic about what we're facing. Mija, Elena said softly. Being realistic and having faith aren't opposite things. I want you to do every treatment the doctors recommend. I want you to fight with every tool modern medicine can give you. But I also want everyone in this room to understand that God specializes in impossible situations. Dr. Chen looked at his watch. Isabella, I need to get you started on pre-chemotherapy protocols. We're going to run some additional blood work, get you scheduled for a port placement, and begin mapping out your treatment plan. But as Dr. Chen began discussing the medical logistics of Isabella's treatment, I found myself studying Elena's face. There was something about her certainty, something about the way she spoke about miracles, that reminded me of cases I'd seen early in my career. Cases where the medical outcome defied statistical probability. Mrs. Gonzalez, I said quietly. Earlier you asked me to promise that when medical options are exhausted, I would try one more test. What kind of test were you thinking about? Elena smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked almost hopeful. Dr. Harrison, I don't know exactly what kind of test. I just know that when everyone else says there's nothing more to be done, when the cancer has supposedly won, I want you to look again. Really look. Because I believe that God is going to do something in my daughter's case that will surprise everyone in this hospital. Carlos looked at his mother-in-law with concern. Mama Elena, I love your optimism, but we can't false hope cloud our judgment. Isabella needs real medical treatment. And she's going to get it, Elena said firmly. Every bit of treatment these wonderful doctors can provide. But Carlos, hope and medicine aren't enemies. They're partners. And sometimes, when medicine has done everything it can do, hope opens the door for something greater. As we prepared to leave Isabella's room so the nurses could begin her pre-treatment preparations, Elena pulled me aside one more time. Dr. Harrison, she whispered, I know you think I'm just a frightened mother clinging to false hope. But I need you to remember something. In 72 hours, something is going to happen that will make you question everything you thought you knew about healing. And when that happens, I need you to trust what you see, even if it doesn't make medical sense. I wanted to dismiss Elena's words as the desperate hope of a mother facing the unthinkable. But something about the specificity of her timeline, 72 hours, and something about the absolute certainty in her voice made me pause. What I didn't know as I walked out of Isabella's room that day was that Elena wasn't speaking from hope alone. She was speaking from a kind of knowledge that would soon turn everything I understood about medicine completely upside down. Exactly 71 hours and 15 minutes after Elena had whispered those words to me, I was sitting in my laboratory at 11:45 at night, staring at something that should have been impossible. Let me back up and tell you what happened in those 71 hours. Because what unfolded during Isabella's first round of treatment was unlike anything I'd witnessed in my entire career. The chemotherapy had begun on Thursday morning, exactly 48 hours after our devastating family conference. Dr. Chen had chosen an aggressive protocol, a combination of carboplatin and paclitaxel that typically produces significant side effects but offers the best chance of slowing the cancer's progression. Isabella had been remarkably strong during that first infusion, holding Carlos's hand and chatting with the nurses as if she were there for a routine appointment rather than fighting for her life. But by Friday evening, something unexpected started happening. Instead of the severe nausea, fatigue, and weakness that we typically see with this level of chemotherapy, Isabella seemed to be improving. Not just tolerating the treatment well, but actually getting stronger. Dr. Harrison, Dr. Chen had called me Friday night around 8:30, his voice filled with confusion. I need you to come up to the oncology ward. Isabella Martinez is showing a response to treatment that I've never seen before. When I arrived at Isabella's room, I found her sitting up in bed, completely alert, eating dinner with an appetite that shocked me. 48 hours earlier, this woman had been weak and pale. Now she looked like she had more energy than some of our healthiest patients. Dr. Harrison, Isabella said when she saw me, her voice strong and clear. Dr. Chen says my blood work is showing some unusual improvements. What does that mean exactly? Dr. Chen pulled me aside and showed me Isabella's latest lab results. Her white blood cell count, which had been dangerously low due to the cancer's effects, had not only stabilized but was climbing toward normal ranges. Her inflammatory markers, which should have been sky-high with this level of metastatic disease, were dropping significantly. Mike, Dr. Chen said quietly, using my first name. Something he only did when he was truly puzzled by a case. I've been doing oncology for 15 years. I've never seen a patient respond this quickly to chemotherapy. Usually, if we see any response at all, it takes weeks, sometimes months. Isabella's showing measurable improvement in less than 48 hours. Elena, who had barely left her daughter's bedside since Tuesday, overheard our conversation. Doctors, she said with that same calm certainty I was beginning to recognize. Isabella is responding because God is preparing her body for what's about to happen. What do you mean, Mrs. Gonzalez? Dr. Chen asked. Elena looked at the clock on the wall. It was 8:45 on Friday night. In about 15 hours, Dr. Harrison is going to see something that will change how he thinks about healing forever. I have to admit, Elena's specific timelines were starting to unnerve me. First, the 72 hours prediction, now 15 hours. But I was a scientist, and I dealt in observable phenomena, not mystical predictions from worried mothers. Saturday morning arrived with a phone call that would change everything. At 6:30 in the morning, my phone rang at home. It was Sarah, my lab assistant, and she sounded completely panicked. Dr. Harrison, you need to get to the lab immediately. Something's happened with Isabella Martinez's tissue samples. What do you mean, something's happened? Tissue samples don't just change, Sarah. Sir, I know this sounds impossible, but you need to see this for yourself. I came in early to prepare some slides for Monday's cases, and I decided to check on Mrs. Martinez's samples. Dr. Harrison, they don't look the same. I was at the hospital within 20 minutes, my mind racing through possible explanations. Sample contamination, mislabeling, equipment malfunction. There had to be a logical reason for whatever Sarah had observed. But when I walked into the pathology lab and looked through the microscope at Isabella's tissue slides, my mouth fell open. The aggressive, rapidly dividing cancer cells that I had examined just 4 days earlier were different. Not gone. I need to be clear about that. But fundamentally altered. The cellular structure that had screamed terminal cancer was now showing signs of organization, of normalization, that defied every textbook I'd ever read. Sarah, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Are you absolutely certain these are Isabella Martinez's original samples? I've checked and double-checked the labeling, sir. These are definitely her samples from Tuesday's biopsy. But Dr. Harrison, look at the cellular division patterns. Look at the nuclear structure. This doesn't look like the same tissue. I spent the next 3 hours examining every slide, running every test protocol I could think of. I called in Dr. Patricia Williams, our most senior pathologist, and Dr. James Chen, Dr. Robert Chen's brother who specializes in cellular biology. I wanted multiple expert opinions because what I was seeing challenged everything I understood about cancer progression. Mike, Dr. Williams said after examining the slides for over an hour, in 30 years of pathology, I've never seen cellular changes this dramatic, this fast. If I didn't know better, I'd say these samples came from 2 different patients. Dr. James Chen was even more bewildered. The malignant cells are still present, he said, but they're behaving in a way that contradicts everything we know about adenocarcinoma. It's as if something is actively restructuring the cellular environment. At 10:15 that morning, exactly 15 hours and 30 minutes after Elena's prediction, I made a decision that went against every protocol I'd followed in 23 years of practice. I decided to perform an experimental analysis using a technique that was still in research trials, something called quantum cellular resonance imaging. It was a method that could examine tissue at the molecular level, looking for patterns and structures that traditional microscopy might miss. Most hospitals didn't even have the equipment yet, but Orlando Regional had received one of the first prototype machines just 2 months earlier. "Sarah," I said, "prepare Isabella's most recent sample for QCRI analysis." "Sir, that equipment is still experimental. We don't even have established protocols for cancer tissue analysis." "I know," I said, remembering Elena's words about trying one more test. "But conventional analysis isn't explaining what we're seeing. Maybe we need to look at this from a completely different angle." The QCRI analysis took 4 hours to complete. During that time, I found myself pacing the lab, checking my watch, and thinking about Elena's impossible certainty that something significant would happen around this time. At 2:15 in the afternoon, the QCRI results finally displayed on the computer screen. What I saw there made me call every colleague I could think of. The quantum analysis revealed something that should have been scientifically impossible. Isabella's cancer cells weren't just changing. They were being systematically restructured at the molecular level. The malignant cellular programming was being rewritten, as if some external force was literally editing the genetic instructions that told these cells to be cancerous. "This can't be right," I said to Sarah, but even as I spoke the words, I knew the analysis was correct. The QCRI machine had run multiple verification cycles, and every result showed the same impossible conclusion. Dr. Williams looked at the results and immediately called for additional testing. "Mike, if this is accurate, if cancer cells can be reprogrammed at the molecular level without any intervention we're aware of, this changes everything we understand about oncology." But I wasn't thinking about the broader implications for cancer research. I was thinking about Elena's prediction, about her absolute certainty that something would happen in 72 hours, and about the way she'd spoken about God preparing her daughter's body for what's about to happen. At 4:30 that afternoon, exactly 72 hours after Elena had first whispered her prediction to me, I received another phone call. It was Dr. Robert Chen from oncology, and his voice was shaking with excitement. "Mike, you need to get up here immediately. Isabella's latest CT scan just came back, and I need you to explain to me how this is medically possible." I ran to the elevator, my mind racing with possibilities. When I arrived at the oncology ward, Dr. Chen was waiting with Isabella's scan images displayed on a large monitor. "Mike," he said, pointing to the screen, "these scans were taken this morning. Compare them to the scans from Tuesday." I looked at the images, and for a moment, I couldn't process what I was seeing. The tumors that had been clearly visible throughout Isabella's abdomen 4 days earlier were smaller, significantly smaller, not gone, but reduced by what appeared to be at least 40%. "Robert," I said, my voice barely steady, "cancer doesn't shrink this fast, not with any treatment we have available. This kind of tumor reduction should take months of aggressive therapy." "I know," Dr. Chen replied. "That's why I need you to tell me what's happening at the cellular level. Because whatever's causing this, it's rewriting everything we think we know about cancer treatment." As I stood there staring at those impossible scan results, I heard Elena's voice in the hallway. "Doctors," she was saying to a group of nurses, "this is just the beginning. What you're about to witness will change lives forever." I turned toward Elena's voice, and when our eyes met across the hallway, she smiled with a knowledge that suddenly seemed less like hope and more like absolute certainty about something far beyond anything medicine could explain. What happened next will stay with me for the rest of my life. Elena walked toward me with that same calm certainty she'd maintained throughout this impossible week. But now there was something different in her expression. It wasn't the desperation of a mother clinging to false hope. It was the peace of someone who had witnessed something that confirmed everything she'd believed. "Dr. Harrison," she said quietly, "now you understand why I asked you to look one more time. God doesn't work against science. He works through it, beyond it, in ways that stretch our understanding of what's possible. Before I could respond, Carlos came rushing around the corner, his face flushed with excitement and confusion. Dr. Harrison, Dr. Chen, Isabella wants to see you both immediately. She says she feels different. We practically ran to Isabella's room, and what we found there defied every expectation I had based on 23 years of treating cancer patients. Isabella was sitting up in bed, but she wasn't just alert. She was radiant. Her skin had color that hadn't been there since the day I'd met her. Her eyes were bright, focused, and filled with an energy that seemed impossible for someone who had been fighting stage 4 cancer just days earlier. Dr. Harrison, she said, her voice strong and clear. I need to tell you something that's going to sound crazy, but I need you to listen with an open mind. I pulled up a chair, still trying to process the dramatic physical transformation I was witnessing. At 3 o'clock this morning, Isabella continued, I woke up feeling different. Not just better, different. It was like something fundamental had changed inside my body. I could feel it, Dr. Harrison. I could feel the cancer leaving. Carlos took his wife's hand, and I could see tears in his eyes. Isabella, tell them about the prayer. Isabella looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. Dr. Harrison, my mother and I spent the entire night praying, not just asking God to heal me, but thanking Him for what He was already doing. And at exactly 3 o'clock this morning, I felt this warmth spread through my entire body. It started in my chest and moved through my abdomen, and wherever that warmth touched, I could feel healing happening. Isabella, Dr. Chen said gently, the healing you're feeling is likely the result of the chemotherapy finally taking effect, combined with… Doctor, Elena interrupted respectfully. My daughter isn't finished. Isabella squeezed her mother's hand and continued. Dr. Harrison, I know you're a man of science. I know you need proof. So I'm going to ask you to do something that might sound unusual, but I believe it's important. What kind of thing? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect where this was going. I want you to take new tissue samples. Right now. Not tomorrow, not next week. Right now. And I want you to compare them to what you found on Saturday morning. Dr. Chen looked concerned. Isabella, additional biopsies aren't usually necessary so soon after the initial diagnosis, and given your improved condition? Please, Isabella said, her voice filled with quiet insistence. I know this sounds strange, but I believe you're going to find something that will change how you think about healing forever. I looked at Dr. Chen, who shrugged slightly. If Isabella wants additional confirmation of how she's responding to treatment, it's not medically harmful to take new samples. 2 hours later, I was back in my laboratory with fresh tissue samples from Isabella, processing them with the same protocols I'd used on her original biopsy. But this time, Elena had asked to observe the analysis. Mrs. Gonzalez, this is highly unusual, I said as I prepared the slides. Family members typically don't observe pathological analysis. Dr. Harrison, Elena replied, what's been happening with my daughter has been highly unusual from the beginning. I think today's results deserve a witness. I looked through the microscope at Isabella's new tissue sample, and what I saw there made me step back from the equipment entirely. That's impossible, I whispered. What do you see, Dr. Harrison? Elena asked quietly. I looked again, adjusted the microscope settings, and examined the sample from multiple angles. Elena, these cells, they're completely normal. There's no sign of malignancy whatsoever. These look like healthy ovarian tissue samples from a woman who has never had cancer. Elena smiled, but it wasn't a smile of surprise. It was a smile of confirmation. Dr. Harrison, now you understand why I was so certain about the 72 hours. I wasn't hoping for a miracle. I was waiting for one I already knew was coming. I called Dr. Chen immediately, and within an hour, we had performed every diagnostic test available. CT scans, MRI, blood work, tumor markers, everything that could possibly detect the presence of cancer in Isabella's body. Every single test came back completely normal. Mike, Dr. Chen said as we reviewed the results for the third time. In 15 years of oncology, I have never seen a complete remission this rapid, this total. Stage 4 adenocarcinoma doesn't just disappear in 5 days. But Elena had one more thing to show us. Dr. Harrison, there's something else. Something Isabella hasn't told you yet. Isabella looked at her mother, then at me. Dr. Harrison, I want to share my story. I want to tell other families facing impossible diagnoses that hope isn't just wishful thinking. It's faith in action combined with medical science guided by something greater than ourselves. 6 months later, Isabella Martinez returned to teaching at Lake Eola Elementary. Her follow-up scans continued to show no trace of cancer. Her children, Emma and Diego, got their mother back not just for years, but completely healthy and cancer-free. But the case that changed me wasn't just about Isabella's healing. It was about learning that the boundaries I thought existed between science and faith were actually doorways to possibilities I'd never considered. I still practice pathology with the same scientific rigor I've always maintained. But now I approach each case with an understanding that healing can happen in ways that textbooks can't explain, that hope and medicine aren't opposing forces, and that sometimes the most important test a doctor can perform is the one that looks beyond what seems medically possible. Before I continue, tell me in the comments which city and country you're watching from. Stories like Isabella's reach farther than you imagine, and they remind us that miracles don't contradict science. They expand our understanding of what science can accomplish when guided by something greater than ourselves. Elena was right about one thing. Some things belong not only to science, but to life and faith. If this story touched you, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. In a world filled with impossible diagnoses and devastating news, you're not alone. And sometimes, when medical options seem exhausted, that's exactly when the most profound healing begins.